Forged in Fire, one of those shows that holds a special place in my heart because it does a whole bunch of stuff that I really, really enjoy. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, the gloves he's wearing, right? The gloves he's wearing. Ooh, okay, that's a rough one. But that doesn't mean that it is flawless in its execution, as we'll see. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. Today we're going to be taking a look at some more Forged in Fire fails. However, specifically what I'm looking for in today's episode is fails where the judges were at fault. And then at the end, on average, we'll see who was at fault more, the weapon or the judge. Now obviously with this particular type of design of axe, there's a lot of material being suspended without much support, right? And obviously if you make it too thin, if you make it, etc., it can be prone to breaking, especially with something like an axe where you're putting so much force into such a large surface area of the blade. They're chopping into some wood. I mean, like, I think the test is perfectly valid. It's an axe, you're chopping some wood. Yeah, makes sense to me. And boom, alrighty. Let's have a closer look at that. Comes in. His edge alignment looks good, honestly. And he hit that directly right where the most support on the axe is, I would say. I don't think it's the judge's fault at all. Edge alignment looks good, the angle of attack looks good. Essentially he hit it right at the most meaty part of the blade, but because there's so much extra material on the blade, obviously all of that momentum wants to keep it going, so it snapped. Not the judge's fault. All right, let's have a look here. What have we got? We got Doug slicing up a ballistic dummy, as he usually does. Edge alignment looks good, everything looks good. Oof, that one was a little rough, but all right, where's the failure? Whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on a second here, buddy. Oof, that's a rough one. Oh, okay. I think, all right, this one is a little bit difficult. All right, obviously we're dealing with like 1080p video. It's a little bit hard, especially with the motion blur, that sort of stuff. But from what I can tell, it looks like his edge alignment was reasonable on the attack, but when he actually made contact with the bridge of, the skull or whatever, his grip was not perfectly firm, and that allowed it to twist in his hands, and it obviously twisted over and has basically slapped, right? That's what that looks like to me. I mean, so much so that he literally, he drops out of his hand. So I'm actually going to say that this is more so on the judge. Because like, if I'm looking here, right, just let me have a look. Like, the gloves he's wearing, right? The gloves he's wearing are these black nitrile, what are they? Black nitrile disposable gloves. They're essentially, obviously, a thin silicon plastic, whatever they are, right? Nitrile, whatever that is. He's wearing these gloves that obviously once they get wet and you're holding a sword, it's obviously going to make it a lot more difficult. He's slicing up the ballistic dummy, blood or, liquid, water, whatever it is going all over his hands and his arm, all that sort of stuff. And then he comes in for this strike here. Like, you see how much is obviously getting over everything. Yep, all fine and dandy. Comes around for a big slash on the head. He's coming in, he's at full extension. And yeah, it looks like his attack angle was acceptable. But because he's wearing these, these gloves that are obviously have, liquids and fluids on them and stuff like that, and he hits it, his grip is obviously not strong enough and slips completely out of his hand. I'm going to say this is the judge's fault. This one is actually on Doug, I think, here. Comes in. Edge alignment looked good. Everything looked good. I think that was just purely onto the sword. I mean, you look at the heat treatment. Yep. Okay, next up. Next one. What have we got? So this one we did check out in the previous episode. I do think it's worth putting into this episode because obviously it is, I think, the judge's fault, and also it's in the particular compilation that I'm watching. So we have a big large sword, right? He comes in. Yeah, okay. Same sort of thing. This is Doug, right? He's using a big long blade like that does have issues with edge alignment, right? It's difficult. It's one of those things that you have to practice essentially. And what it looks like to me, when he comes in, he's kind of rising with his cut. So instead of bringing it in and slashing, he's kind of pushing and rising at the same time, that sort of motion. And when he does that, the blade comes in like this, hits, and then essentially slaps. Very similar to the one we just watched previously, but let's go through it here. Yeah. So obviously he's coming in for like a horizontal cut, right? Instead of coming in like this, nice and flat, he's kind of at a bit of an angle like this and rising with it at the same time. And so when it makes contact, it just wants to slap. And that's what happens with, you know, like a big, large blade, right? And it snaps the blade in half. So I'm going to say this one is also the judge's fault. But it is worthy to acknowledge that when you are testing something like this as a human, right? The moment that a human is testing something, you're introducing human error. There is always that risk and there is always that chance. And there have been times when I, you know, test things or I hit things and it doesn't go the way that I want, or sometimes my edge alignment's bad. For example, rolling with the blade, right? With my big giant sword, it was so heavy and the handle that I made on it was so terrible that every time I would hit something, it immediately wanted to roll and slip. So that was a mistake that I made, and I was rolling with that particular, that blade was absurd, but the concept is still there. You can make mistakes, and sometimes your edge alignment can be shit. Sometimes you could just have off days, you know, that happens. Sometimes I'll be cutting and it's just like, man, it's not my day today. And then other days, it'll be no worries. So it's one of those things that you can just have bad days, right? Anybody can. Thanks for holding that for me, buddy. Oh, if you're enjoying today's episode, you should consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, buddy. What? This dude just sliced up an entire pig carcass. Sorry, I know we're not supposed to be talking about the tests or anything, but I'm very confused. Why did the other dude slice up that pig carcass like 10 times, then for the other dude just did one and then gave up? Ooh, okay. They make it so difficult because this is a nuanced one. This isn't a, yes, this is the judge's fault. Yes, this is, you know, the smith's fault or whatever, right? This one here is a little bit more nuanced. We obviously have quite a wide blade. And on top of that, it has a lot of weight and mass around the specific area that he's obviously chopping into. And like the example that I mentioned just a few minutes ago with the giant sword, it means that actually controlling that edge alignment when it hits into something, because it immediately wants to hit and flop over, it wants to continue going, right? Means that it's really difficult to control. Obviously with this sort of blade, it should be a lot more controllable because it's a normal human-sized blade rather than a giant sword. But his edge alignment did look fine, honestly. When he actually hit into it, it looked like a lot of that mass and momentum of the blade wanted to keep going. And so that kind of, when it hit, it wanted to, you know, warp. So this one, I would kind of actually give, I don't think this one is the judge's fault. This one is one of those ones where maybe there's a little bit of human error, but honestly, this could have happened to anyone. But what I don't like, this is interesting, right? Because this is not, how to describe this? This is not how I would slash with this sort of blade. He is very, very close to his target, and he's kind of like this. If we look at, you know, how he's holding it, he's essentially slashing like this. Right? Now with this type of blade in this sort of way, and I think this comes into obviously what they are. I believe they're like Kali practitioners, Kali stick practitioners. With this sort of blade at this sort of length, with this sort of curve, I'm not going to be slashing like this. Just honestly, he's slashing essentially, like it looks like he's slashing mostly down near the strong of the blade. That with a horizontal cut into a pig carcass like this, we're going to be slashing with the last, you know, a third of the blade. You know, having that curve allows it to obviously slash through a target nice and easy. So I'm going to actually put this one on the judge. I think his edge alignment is, I don't think this guy's a judge. I think he's standing in for Doug. You know what I mean. His edge alignment initially looks fine, but his body placement and where he's actually slashing on the blade and kind of how his body's positioned, I don't like personally. And so I'm actually more than happy to say this is his fault, because like if I was doing a, you know, a nice horizontal slash with that, I would not be down the lower portion of the blade, especially with a nice curved blade like this. Like, just look at where he makes contact on the blade. It's so strange. And again, maybe for a shorter blade, like, something that you like, a machete or something like that, this sort of length, this sort of positioning, fine, right? But for a longer blade like this, no, I wouldn't cut like that. Again, the nuance is difficult on this one, because I think the blade should be able to stand up to that sort of motion. I don't think it should snap from that. But at the same time, I think he's cutting way too low on the blade as well. His edge alignment did look good, and then it kind of rolled a bit. But again, he wouldn't have had this issue if he was cutting closer towards the tip. Human error. Like, I don't know how else to describe it, Edge alignment looks perfectly fine. Grip looks fine. Everything looks fine. It just looks like the blade hit, couldn't handle it. It sent some of that, that shock and that flex right back into, obviously, the hilt, and has snapped at the tang. But judge, perfectly good. Looks good to me. Next one, what have we got? His edge alignment looks good. Cut looks nice. Follow through looks like everything looks good. It just looks like it broke at the haft, which obviously I don't blame on the judge at all, of the stand-in for the judge. He comes in, I think his edge alignment looks okay, but then immediately just twists in his hand and boom. But that actually could be down to the handle, because if I remember, on this particular blade, the handle was not very good. So I'm actually willing to say that in this particular case, this is not the judge's fault at all. I think it's actually just the shape and design of the handle. Obviously, that is your connection point to the blade. Really important to get that right. So in this particular case, I don't think it's the judge's fault. Let's see if we get a close up of that handle. Oof. See, that handle is rough, I'm not gonna lie. But I think that is going to be our last clip. From what I can tell, when it comes to not all of the failures, obviously, there are failures where it's purely just on the weapon. There are failures where, obviously the weapon just should have held up to something. But then I would say that there are some more nuanced kind of failures that are actually happening with some weapons, where perhaps the judge isn't positioned perfectly correct, their grip isn't, as good as it could be, and then at the same time the weapon is perhaps not as robust as it could be, and all of these kind of, I would say, variables are all coming together to create a failure. That's what it seems like to me. But there are some examples where I'm like, the edge alignment here is just not the best at all, and that's kind of obviously leading to a failure. But on average, I would say most of the tests are good in terms of how the judges are actually testing the things. But I would say that there are some examples in here of perhaps that wasn't necessarily the weapon's fault, if you get what I'm saying. But that's going to be all. Thank you guys for watching. I genuinely hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe, and as always, I'll see you next week in another episode. Have a good one.